Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to this brand new episode of Business Africa. I am Ronald Katum. Coming up on this week's edition, massive aid cuts by Washington cause panic in African capitals. We assess the limitations of aid and how developing countries can build a more self-sustaining future. Plus, a bank to finance Africa's energy ambitions. Petroleum producers Nigeria, Libya and Angola team up to launch the Africa Energy Bank to finance oil and gas projects snapped by Western lenders. And rural women farmers in northern Morocco are pulling together in cooperatives to access capital, add value, market their produce and challenge stereotypes. Stay with us for the details. Thank you for joining us. Massive aid cuts announced by the US are upsetting African economies in various ways. But they also bring back decades-old questions about the net impact of foreign aid on structural economic change in low-income recipient countries. This report now on whether aid can be reformed to deliver more value for recipients and less donor interest.
In many developing countries, US aid dollars did more than just fund schools, hospitals and humanitarian work. They offered jobs, supported local businesses and were a good source of forex, shoring up the economies of the countries where they were sent. The hardest hit countries are now scrambling to find new partners or to find ways to plug holes created by the withdrawal of US funding. Per its own figures, the United States spent $72 billion in foreign aid in 2023, more than $40 billion of which was administered by USAID. That year, the largest sector spend of all foreign aid was economic development at $19.4 billion, most of which went to Ukraine. The top 5 largest recipients were Ukraine, followed by Israel. In Africa, Ethiopia and Egypt took the lion's share, sharing $3.2 billion between them. If they persist, US aid cuts will spell even more doom in countries most dependent on them. In the Central African Republic, South Sudan and Somalia, foreign aid constitutes above 22% of national income. They are also conflict-hit or without viable economies. The aid cuts have also resurrected questions about the effectiveness of foreign aid and whether or not it is good enough to help developing countries achieve structural economic change.
My guest is Dr. Theophilus Achiampong, an economist and political risk analyst. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. To what extent have decades of foreign aid responded to the economic needs of recipient countries?
The impact of aid on economic growth on the continent actually significantly negative. And you also do find at the aggregate or at the macro level, not really that translating into broader productivity enhancement or growth in the respective, sectors. There are some exceptions to this, though, that if you look at within the social sector, so for example, in health and education, you can see some evidence of positive impact of aid within these sectors. But again, these are fairly limited in the broader scheme of things.
How can aid be reimagined, restructured to deliver better value for its recipients?
Traditionally, these aids have come in the form of grants and call it handouts. And the whole emphasis of what, for example, China and other countries have shown on the continent in the last 15 or so years is really to move more towards strategic investments. So investment in infrastructure, investment in entrepreneurship, in industry, that would really allow our African countries to build up the productive capacities that would allow them to generate the wealth in the first place and tax it and use those revenues to drive, development. I also think related to that is also the idea of using some of these trade instruments to provide blended finance to our respective countries. So, for example, can we get concessional funding coming in to help de-risk infrastructure projects within the clean energy or within agriculture and within manufacturing. Those ones would create far more jobs, and these jobs would also be more sustainable. So fundamentally, you need a rethink of the whole aid, architecture to allow our countries to move from begging, so to say, to actually creating the ecosystem that we can create wealth ourselves.
You briefly touched on trade, and an argument has been made by the likes of the Ugandan president that developed countries should replace aid with fairer trade. What do you say about it?
Absolutely. I mean, there are structural dependencies that we should not lose sight of. You cannot aid your way to development. You need to trade. You need to create things. You need to make things. And you need to be able to trade with your regional neighbors as well as with countries further out, at large. And if you don't address these historic structural imbalances that ensures that, for example, African countries keep remaining at the bottom of the development ladder, it doesn't matter how much aid you pour into that. It's never going to turn things around. But that's one side of the argument. I think the other side of the argument is that our countries themselves also have some, reflection to do. For example, the issues of corruption, the issue of low value for money. These are all issues that we need to address internally.
Theo Achampong, nice to have you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, a bank dedicated to financing African energy projects is opening its doors this March. The Africa Energy Bank is a bold endeavor by African leaders tired of begging for Western investment to power a continent with massive energy needs.
Several years in the making, the African Energy Bank is now a reality. Targeting an asset base of $120 billion, the bank will finance African oil and gas, long starved of funds by Western lenders and multilateral banks. Many oil-rich African countries are unable to develop their oil reserves, with lenders citing climate change concerns.
Of all the regions in the world, Africa gets the least amount of investment. For example, on renewable energy investment in the world, we will get only 2%, even though this is a region starved for energy. And so for African governments and the oil exporters in Africa to decide that it makes sense for them to have their own bank and finance these projects independently, I think is a big deal.
The bank will also invest in new gas-fired power plants to help meet Africa's immense energy needs. According to the International Energy Agency, 43% of the total population lack access to electricity, with the majority residing in sub-Saharan Africa.
These energy assets that are in Uganda, that are in Nigeria, that are in Angola, selling them allows our governments to raise resources so that they might be able to invest in health and education. The idea then that we should just forget about these assets that could end up financing us makes no sense, especially if the people most responsible for climate change continue to use oil and gas, and somehow it's Africa who must give up its oil and gas assets. It's never made sense to Africans, and that's why they're going this direction.
The bank plans to raise capital through contributions by interested countries. Additional funding will come from sovereign wealth funds, commodity traders, and international banks.
Cooperatives in northern Morocco are helping women farmers access capital, add value to their produce, and challenge stereotypes. Despite making up over 50% of the agricultural workforce, Morocco's women still struggle for a voice.
In the northern Moroccan mountains of Chefchaouen, Ihsan Hamoudan leads Biosalim Cooperative, a group of 30 rural women making natural local products. Like many female farmers, they faced societal and logistical challenges until El Mutmir, a national initiative, offered them support.
When Biosalim was launched, there were only 7 women. We didn't have enough funds and we didn't know where to market our products until we were introduced to El Mutmir. More women joined the cooperative and demand for our products has increased.
Biosalim is one of over 400 women-led cooperatives supported by El Mutmir. Since its inception in 2018, more than 4,000 female farmers have benefited from the program.
We provide them with a range of training sessions to enhance their agricultural skills. We also offer training in personal development and entrepreneurship.
In Morocco, women make up over 50% of the agricultural workforce, but still face resource inequalities.
One of the main challenges we still face is social justice and the absence of markets for promoting local products. Without these, cooperatives cannot sustain themselves.
Initiatives like El Mutmir offer valuable tools to reduce the disparity gap, helping women achieve financial stability and a stronger voice in their communities.
And that report from Morocco brings us to the end of this edition of Business Africa. I am Ronald Kato. The news is next on Africa News and at africanews.com. Bye for now, and I'll see you on the next episode of Business Africa.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.